Alden Global Capital is set to be the new owner of the Chicago Tribune. Shareholders of the Tribune and other affiliate papers voted last week on a takeover bid by the controversial hedge fund in a deal worth roughly $630 million. Many in and out of the journalism industry had hoped this deal could be avoided, saying that it could cripple the Chicago Tribune. And joining us to answer that and more are David Jackson, a senior investigative reporter at the Better Government Association. Jackson is also a former Tribune reporter, and Charles Whitaker, dean and professor at Northwestern University's Medill School of Journalism. We reached out to Alden Global Capital for comment, but have not received a response. We do thank the two of you for being back here. First, David Jackson, Friday was the day that you and your former colleagues had hoped to avoid. You had warned against this takeover bid from Alden Global Capital. Now that it's done, what does this mean for the short and long term of the Chicago Tribune?
Well, it's really, Paris, a question about what it means for our city and for the other cities that have had these great Tribune Publishing newsrooms standing up for their communities. And in my opinion, this is the question is, what does this mean for American democracy? What do we lose when we lose local and regional newspapers? And I think on all of those counts, Alden's triumph is the community's loss.
Charles Whitaker, is it a fait accompli that Alden, now fully in control of the company, will just slash to the bone and diminish resources? I'm sorry, Charles, I think you're on mute.
Sorry about
that. There you
go. If history is any indication, yes, I think that is true. Their pattern is to go in and maximize profits, and that means cutting everything to the bone so that you can squeeze as much profit as possible out of the product.
And that is sort of consistent with the other papers that they have owned for the last several years. Let's hear from Chicago Tribune reporter and union president over there, Greg Pratt, about his fears of this takeover.
Alden Global Capital often talks about how they care about sustainable futures for journalism and news, but there isn't a ton of evidence to support that. They've got a horrible track record on that, and you have to take people for what they do, not for what they say.
David Jackson, you and your former colleague Gary Marks tried feverishly to find deep-pocketed investors, civic leaders that would mount a competing takeover bid. Now that Alden has finished its deal, does that mean there is no hope for any other bid? Say a civic leader wants to come forward now and offer Alden more than that $630 million.
I am not at the deal table, Paris, but I would say emphatically that the window is closed for that type of negotiation. We looked beyond deep-pocketed and wealthy investors. We looked at and talked to the philanthropies in Chicago and to many in the journalism community here and various community organizations to try to see what could be knit together. And at the end of the day, this apparently was something in which the city leaders simply, and when I say leaders, I mean the nonprofit and business and civic leaders couldn't step up to do.
Charles Whitaker, is this the only way out for newspapers to beg deep-pocketed folks, billionaires or philanthropic folks to come in and rescue the newspaper?
I don't think relying on benevolent billionaires and the philanthropic community is the way out. Unfortunately, it looks like the only way out now because that's the only model that we have that seems to be working. But it's been very, very clear that the philanthropic community does not want to be on the hook for propping up these publications in perpetuity. Billionaires ultimately want to make money, and so we're going to have to look for alternative business models to support journalism going forward.
And David Jackson, you know, we had talked about in the past on this program some of the philanthropic leaders that were in high-level discussions. You spoke to many philanthropic folks, civic leaders. What was the reasoning that you gleaned that they did not want to dip their toe in any of this?
Well, the Chicago Tribune had been damaged by a series of greedy and boneheaded corporate directors over several years, and obviously had lost its foreign bureaus, its national bureaus, its Washington bureaus. And so when you sat down to look at the books today and see how could you revive an ambitious, mission-driven civic-minded journalism enterprise from what was left. It was tough, and that's the reality. I really think Charles is exactly right. However, the future is not wealthy or deep-pocketed investors. The future is readers and subscribers who see value in the work journalism does and are willing to pay a little bit to get that journalism in their homes or on their screens every day. I think that's really where the fight turns now for all the mosaic of nonprofit newsrooms in Chicago and the other very important legacy newsrooms in our city.
And this newsroom, we should, full disclosure, is a nonprofit newsroom. And we've seen some success, Charles Whitaker, of that new model, at least on the hyper-local level with publications like Block Club. But do you see that model backing a legacy institution like the Chicago Tribune? Can something come in and fill that void?
No, I mean, even the hyperlocal model is successful for now, but again, it's still being propped up by philanthropy. It's not actually a model that's built on consumers actually paying what it costs to produce, or a larger fraction of what it costs to produce journalism. And no, that's not a model that will sort of sustain legacy publications like the Chicago Tribune. We are going to have a multi-pronged business model that relies on some subscribers, maybe a little bit vestiges of advertising, maybe events, but we have to rethink what the model for journalism is. And as David said, we've got to convince the public that this is something that's worth paying for. We've done a terrible job convincing the public that journalism is something that's important, that should be maintained. Everyone sort of thinks it's like air and that it should be free. We've got to change that mindset in order to keep journalism thriving.
And David Jackson, a way to do that is to just simply produce great journalism, enterprise stories, and make people realize how essential that is. But do you see this ecosystem in Chicago now as just a patchwork of nonprofits like yours, the Better Government Association, hyperlocal, and some dying legacy outlets, or can anything fill the void here?
Well, when you went back 10 or 15 years ago, Paris, to the Chicago Tribune of the aughts, you saw a civic mission nested in a for-profit company. The newsroom that I became a part of was really basically a group of very idealistic, very committed, passionate journalists who happened to work for a company that was also making, at that time, compared to Alden, a modest profit. And I think that that spirit has never been lost in Chicago. This is a city of kick-butt investigative journalism, of hardcore community journalism that's going back over decades from Studs Terkel forward. And you see that spirit in Block Club Chicago, in many of the other nonprofit outlets. And frankly, I think that it's not my generation that will figure this out. I think it's the next gen coming up.
The coming generation, and obviously so many reporters at the Tribune over the years that have left to go to other places like yourself. They're still here in Chicago, still doing great work, and we'll have to leave it there. Our thanks to Charles Whitaker and David Jackson.
Thanks, Bert.